got something that might interest you. Resident Evil 4.
Oh, over here, stranger. When discussing the highest rated games of all time, Resident Evil 4 is commonly on the list. Originally released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2005, the game has been ported to seemingly every platform in existence since then. It's not a surprise the game has been re-released so many times, as it's very iconic and set the blueprint for third-person shooters going forward. During the GameCube era, Capcom and Nintendo had a very strong relationship, so it makes sense that the game would release on the Wii just a few months after the release of the system. Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition makes full use of the system's unique motion controls, as you can use it to aim Leon's weapons and perform actions like swinging his knife. While motion controls aren't for everyone, they're very well implemented here and actually make the game easier overall compared to some of the other version, as the motion controls are so fast and accurate, it's easier than using an analog stick. If you have a chance to play this version of the game, I definitely recommend trying the motion controls out first, but if you don't like them, you can still fall back to the Wii Classic Remote to play the game in a more traditional control method. I actually have quite a bit of nostalgia for this particular version of Resident Evil 4, as it's the first version of the game I ever played. Back in middle school, one of my friends bought this version and I'd go over to his house and we'd play it. Unfortunately, he got scared of games pretty easily like this, so we never really made it very far in the game. Eventually, I did go to this very blockbuster here, and it's one of the few blockbusters that's still around, and I rented the game and I took it home, and I never beat it, but I really enjoyed my time with it. Years later, after playing through games like the original Resident Evil Remake, I went ahead and beat Resident Evil 4 on the PC with the texture mods and really fell in love with the game. Now, just 2 weeks away from the launch of Resident Evil 4 Remake, I thought it would be the perfect time to play through Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition again, and give my thoughts on the game and go over the unique features it has to offer here. I'll also be touching on some ways you can play Resident Evil 4 using motion controls even if you don't have access to a Wii.
Originally released in January 2005, Resident Evil wasn't exclusive to the GameCube for long, as it made its way to the PS2 later that year and to the Wii in 2007. The Wii Edition features the bonus content that was added to the PS2 version, such as the Separate Ways campaign, where players can play as Ada Wong during the events of the main campaign. Additional bonus content includes special costumes for Leon and Ashley, improvements to the Mercenaries mode, and a few extra weapons. While the extra content is nice, the standout feature of the Wii Edition is clearly the ability to play the game with motion controls. I've never been a huge fan of motion controlled aiming. Give me a mouse or analog sticks instead was always the mindset I had. However, with titles like the Splatoon games, Zelda Breath of the Wild, and even the Steam Deck embracing gyro aiming, it's fair to say there's a reason gyro fans love aiming that way. In Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, you hold the B button on the back of the Wiimote to make Leon aim his weapon. While aiming, a cursor will appear on the screen, which corresponds to the direction the Wiimote is facing. The cursor can be rapidly aimed around any area of the screen that Leon is looking at. Players can turn Leon using the control stick on the nunchuck while aiming if needed to hit targets out of view. If you're familiar with Resident Evil 4, you'll know this is quite different than other versions of the game, as there, Leon's non-scoped weapons are equipped with lasers to indicate where they're being aimed. The laser aiming is an immersive touch to help players feel more connected to the world, but it doesn't always allow for the most accurate shots. In addition to the laser aiming, Leon must be hopped up on caffeine or something, because even while idle, his aim is extremely unstable here. To help alleviate this instability, many weapons have upgrades such as the stock. In the Wii version, however, Leon is as stable and accurate as your hand is, negating the need for several of these upgrades. For my favorite handgun, the Red 9, there was no reason to buy the stock, as I was already deadly accurate the moment I got my hands on it. This aiming method also allows players to switch between targets extremely quickly. Here, I could effortlessly bounce between several targets with my pistol or the TMP submachine gun to keep enemies at bay. On average, my hit rates at the end of the chapters tended to be quite a bit higher here than when I was playing the game with the controller on other versions of the game. In my previous runs of the game, I would often dodge the weapons that Ganados would throw at me from a distance, but here I was so fast and accurate that I often just blasted the weapons out of the air before they hit me. On top of this, my reflexes were usually quick and accurate enough with the Wiimote where I could gun down snakes and boxes as soon as I broke the box open. Since this wasn't my first rodeo through Resident Evil 4 though, I know how most of the enemies functioned and how the levels were laid out, but I breezed through most of the game in this edition. Taking on groups of enemies was easier than ever due to the speed and accuracy of the motion controls, and tough enemies such as the gyrodors were not too painful here, as I could easily shoot the belt to lure them away, then swiftly shoot them in the back as they walked away from Leon. The minecart ride in the castle was another area of the game where I was able to comfortably take out enemies from much further away than usual. While most of the firearms here can be aimed with the motion controls, unfortunately this doesn't extend to the scoped weaponry such as the bolt-action rifle and semi-automatic rifle. Aiming these guns is the same as any other version of the game. I would have loved it though if these guns did function with motion controls, as it would make switching targets very fast. This could have helped immensely later in the game too, when players have to deal with regenerators. Missing shots on the vitals of these bastards is very painful, and the extra accuracy would have been much appreciated. For motion-controlled guns, the switch to a cursor is beneficial beyond the easier aiming, as the cursor also changes colors depending on the target it's placed over. When hovering over enemies, destructible objects, and hidden treasures or traps, the cursor will turn red. Comparing this to other editions of the game, Leon's laser will simply have a dot at the end of it indicating that something's interactable. This is more subtle than the color-changing cursor, and since the cursor can be aimed very quickly, it makes scanning the environment for things like hidden traps very easy on the Wii Edition. If you shoot while the cursor is red, it will guarantee a hit, but when aiming at some enemies that are very far away, the cursor will remain its neutral color. Despite this, you can still hit these enemies from a great distance when this is the case. Speaking about the cursor, an area of the game I really wish it extended to was the inventory management of Resident Evil 4. If you've played Resident Evil 4, you'll know just how much time you spend staring at Leon's attaché case and reorganizing it so you can carry just one more green herb along with you. Being able to use a motion-controlled cursor here would speed things up significantly, and based off the gameplay, it seems like it should be accurate enough to perform the task. Instead, players will have to resort to using the analog stick or D-pad to keep Leon's case organized. Outside of aiming Leon's guns with motion controls, you can also swing his trusty knife by swinging the Wiimote while idle or moving. Initially, I didn't use this method, but soon I resorted to it as my primary method of using the knife. When swinging the knife this way, Leon will automatically aim at and attack the closest target to him, be it a breakable barrel or an enemy. Alternatively, players can hold down the C button on the nunchuck to pull out Leon's knife. From here, it's like other versions of the game where you use the analog stick to aim and then press the A button to swing the knife. The speed of the motion-controlled knife swings was very beneficial during fights, as I didn't have to spend time manipulating the camera to aim at enemies. While I had enemies knocked down, I would often rapidly wiggle the Wiimote in a hurried attempt to take them out with multiple knife swings. Motion controls can also be used to reload the weapons in Leon's arsenal. While aiming with a weapon, you can reload it by giving the Wiimote a quick shake. I always just resorted to using the motion controls to reload the guns, but they can also be reloaded by aiming and then pressing any direction on the Wiimote's D-pad. I never found this motion very comfortable, as you have to stretch your thumb up pretty far to use a D-pad while you're holding down the button on the back of the Wiimote as well. Outside its motion controls and unusual shape, the Wiimote also features a built-in speaker, a feature which Sony must have liked as they include it in both the DualShock 4 and DualSense controllers. Although it's subtle, a nice addition to Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition is having a few sound effects play through the speaker on the Wiimote. The sounds I noticed the most often were the ones of my weapons being reloaded. I enjoy this touch thoroughly, and if you're supposed to think of the Wiimote as your gun here, it makes sense the sound of a fresh mag being loaded would come from there. The sound of Leon's knife cutting through the air is also played back through the speaker when you swing it in the game. This is thoughtful design as it helps players enjoy every feature the Wiimote has to offer. The last few motion control features are for quick time events in either cutscenes or gameplay, and operating devices such as hand wheels to open gates. For QuickTime events, the inputs required can vary even for the same action. Usually the event will ask players to press the A and B button at the same time, or will have them wave the Wiimote to the left. A few events prompt the player to swiftly shake the Wiimote from side to side, and this includes being grabbed by enemies, swimming away from Del Lago, and jumping on the backs of the El Gigantes to hack away at the Las Plagas. This isn't an extensive list of all the opportunities for this action, but it should give you a pretty good idea of where it can be performed. Most players should be able to wave the Wiimote pretty quickly, which should make some of these events easier than on other consoles where you need to mash buttons instead. For opening gates, the Wiimote needs to be rotated in a motion that imitates what the real thing would be like. This can also be done quite fast here, but it was a little bit annoying as I wasn't wearing the wrist strap for the Wiimote, so it kept flying around and hitting me in the wrist while doing this action. Although the Wii version of Resident Evil 4 was released later than the original GameCube version, I actually found the image quality of the GameCube version to be superior here. In this case, I have both these consoles running through my RetroTink 5X, to convert the component cable output to HDMI. To my eyes, the image from the Wii appears blurrier. From what I understand, Resident Evil 4 on the Wii is rendered at a 4:3 aspect ratio like the GameCube Edition. The GameCube Edition is letterboxed to give it a widescreen look on the 4:3 screens it was originally intended for. Capcom simply zoomed in on the letterboxed image for the Wii version to fill wide screens, whereas with the GameCube version here, I'm using my RetroTink 5X to have it fill modern widescreen displays and have it use better upscaling as well. When comparing the Wii Edition to the Ultimate HD Edition released on many platforms, the Wii version comes up quite short visually and also runs at 30 FPS compared to the 60 FPS the Ultimate HD version does. This is understandable as the Wii was essentially souped up GameCube hardware, making it significantly slower than these newer consoles. I personally didn't capture any footage of it here, but for the best visual quality of Resident Evil 4, play the PC version and then use the HD Project mod, which overhauls the graphics even further. If you don't have access to Wii but still want to play Resident Evil 4 with motion controls, there's some other options that could work for you. While it's not likely that you have a Wii U, as most people didn't buy one, that console can also play Wii games just fine. In addition to this, the Wii U is actually equipped with an HDMI port as well, which will make playing the game on modern displays much easier. I also mentioned gyro controls earlier in the video, and luckily the Steam Deck, DualShock 4, and DualSense come equipped with gyro functionality. With a bit of tweaking in the controller settings, I was able to set up my Steam Deck to use gyro to help while aiming in Resident Evil 4 while holding down on the left trigger. I haven't investigated using gyro on the PlayStation controllers much for the PC, but I have seen people do it out there, and even use these controllers with a Dolphin emulator to play the Wii version on PC as intended. The final motion controlled method I'll mention here is Resident Evil 4 VR on the Oculus Quest. While I own a Quest 2, I actually haven't played this version of the game, but I've heard aiming here can even be easier than the Wii version, as you're in first person for most of the experience. Regardless of the way you play Resident Evil 4, the game is still fantastic, and now it's time for me to give some thoughts on the game overall, not just the Wii Edition. To me, Resident Evil 4 is a timeless game regardless of which platform you're playing it on. It's a game whose design rewards situational awareness. Even early on in this game, it can be appreciated when spotting a piece of jewelry hanging above a stinking pool of water. If players just take a second, they'll notice a stick is holding up the lid, and if they shoot it out and then knock the piece of jewelry down, it will reward them with an item of higher value, as opposed to them shooting down the piece of jewelry first, which would cause it to land in the pool of water instead. There are many hidden items stashed around the levels, and require attentive exploration to uncover. Understanding the treasures in your inventory is also rewarded, as it lets players know if treasures can be combined to increase their value. This situational awareness extends to combat encounters in the form of understanding how enemies work, which weapons work best against them, and knowing what animations give Leon invincibility frames. Using these animations at specific times can be super useful for getting around enemies, hitting multiple at once, and avoiding damage. There are a few things as rewarding as shooting out a Ganato's leg while being surrounded by others, and then kicking all the enemies at once while being protected for those few seconds by sweet iframes. Even when it comes to the resource management of the game, it's always good to be mindful of your ammo, grenades, and healing items. It's been stated before by other creators, but everything in survival horror games, including your health bar, is a resource, and you should always carefully consider how to optimally trade in encounters with enemies. While ammo in Resident Evil 4 is generally more abundant than some other Resident Evil titles, the most efficient method to taking out enemies should always be considered. When it comes down to it, I almost view Resident Evil 4 as an amusement park. Hell, the game's even got a shooting gallery and basically a roller coaster ride. Simply put, the game is just damn fun to play, with an excellent balance of combat, resource management, and puzzle solving. The campiness of the game may seem like a strange fit given its dark tone and tense atmosphere, but I absolutely love it. It helps the game from feeling too serious and keeps a nice jovial quality about the game.
Oh, excuse me, Your Highness. Perhaps the young lady might want to introduce herself first before asking someone his name.
As of recording this video, we are right on the cusp of the remake's release, so I'm curious to see how it handles these aspects of the original, as the tones in the remake appear much more grim. Fortunately, the demo for the remake is out, and it did show that some of the most iconic lines from the original have stuck around.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Despite my high praise for Resident Evil 4, I do have some gripes with the game. I find much of the island, the last area of the game, to be a step down compared to the earlier portions. The island tends to be more action-filled, but still has some horror elements, especially when dealing with regenerators. I just can't forget the noise those guys make, as it always keeps me anxious once right around the next corner. I can understand the decision to ramp up the action on the island though. Designers probably wanted to make sure players had plenty of things to shoot near the end of the game, as players probably acquired a large arsenal of upgraded weapons by then. The writing of the game is definitely a product of its time, and I enjoy the goofiness of it, but I can see it turning some new players off.
Hasta luego.
Finally, I want to discuss Ashley. Some players really can't stand her and having to babysit her, but I don't really have a major problem with her. If you really break it down, Ashley is with Leon for less than half of the chapters in the game. Even in the instances where Ashley is with you, her AI is very basic, which is probably a good thing for the time. Typically, it isn't hard to hide her or just have her stand back out of harm's way. I also actually enjoy the small area of the game where you control Ashley, as it's a good little change of pace, and you can clear this portion of the game in probably 15 minutes or less, so I don't really get any major complaints about it. Ashley and Leon have a nice chemistry, and seeing them overcome the challenges Sadler throws at them is pretty fun.
Looks like this is it.
Ugh, it stinks.
Sure does.
No way, Leon.
Way.
There's also some nice details with Ashley. For instance, when you take out enemies with Leon, sometimes Ashley throws out small fist pumps.
15 years since the launch of Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, the game is still just as fun to play now as it was back then. If you made it all the way to the end here, thanks for watching the video. I do all the editing, filming, and everything for these videos, so if you like it, subscribe. I do roughly one video a month, so I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, keep it locked here, and have a good one.